You are listening to Infertility Bites. It's a catharsis podcast. Infertility bites, but it bites a bit less when you're not alone. My name is Casey, and as always, I'm blessed to be joined by my co-captain in this journey, my wife, Sarah.
Hello.
On this series, we are going to continue talking about our experiences dealing with infertility. It's important always to note that we are not doctors or even really experts, just people that understand how difficult it can be because we went through it ourselves. Each person's journey is unique, like a fingerprint, so it's best to leave the medicine to the professionals because they've seen it all.
Yes.
Last week, we talked a bit about the statistics of infertility. We also shared a hauntingly beautiful poem about infertility. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode, make sure to go back once you've done with this one.
Definitely.
It's a very good poem to listen to, and some really nice statistics that can help you maybe feel a little bit less earth-shattered by infertility. To realize that it affects a lot more people than you probably think it does. But also some good statistics like 90% treatability rate. That's a really heartening one, that 90% of cases of infertility have some way that they can treat it. Even if they don't know exactly what's causing it, they often can find some way to treat it to bring you back to basically normal reproduction level, which still is only 20% success, but that's better than 0%. So this time we're going to get back into our tale, the road to treatment.
Yay.
Okay, so when we last talked about our treatment, we specifically said how we finally got to a doctor who took it seriously enough to finally say, I don't know what's causing your problems. You need to go see a specialist.
Yeah.
This was after 5 years of talking to a doctor, 6 years almost.
About around that, yeah.
Of talking to doctors about infertility here and there, and, you know, going through all sorts of tests. We talked at one point about, I think I ended up doing 3 different semen analyses in Kearney. And all of them came back according to their lab normal. I'm using the air quotes. They would say things like low normal, but still normal, so we don't know why you're not having a baby.
I'd only got tested the 3-day cycle, and then the one test with the doctor with, I can't remember what the name of it is, with the dye to make sure your tubes are open.
Those are all the tests that they did specifically for you, but they did put you through all sorts of stuff like the basal body temperature, fertility logging, ovulation logging, all of that stuff. And frankly, this is something that pretty much anyone who's struggling with infertility will talk about, or at least will understand. Maybe they won't talk about it, right? But something that's supposed to be a pleasurable, fun experience between husband and wife can very quickly start to feel like a chore when it becomes so regimented, we have to do it on this day, and then we can't do it for these 2 days, but then we've got to do it on this day, and
just kind of sucks the fun out of it. So
and you know that every person I've talked to who's dealt with fertility problems has complained about basically the same thing. And you know, I had a coworker at one point say something along the lines of, well, you know, it's the practice that's the most fun. And that's because they don't really understand that. I mean, it gets to a point, you can practice all you want for the Super Bowl, but if you never make it to the Super Bowl, eventually the practices stop becoming fun. So, but we finally had a doctor who did their tests and said, hey, I don't know what's causing this. I don't know. You're going to have to go see a specialist. And she recommended us to the Methodist Women's Hospital here in Omaha, Nebraska, where we now live. Dr. Delaney, who was, the doctor in Kearney was the resident for Dr. Delaney when she was in med school. So she knew Dr. Delaney and knew Dr. Delaney knew all the stuff and recommended us to her. But here's the deal. where we lived was, like we said before, Kearney, Nebraska. That's about a 3-hour drive from Omaha. That's 3 hours one way and then 3 hours back. On top of that, most fertility treatment is all upfront cost. Some states we mentioned before have fertility coverage mandated in insurances. Some insurances will have fertility coverage in it, but the vast majority of them don't. And so suddenly you're left with this dilemma of, you want to have a baby, how do you pay for this?
And it's daunting.
It can be very daunting.
Because, like we were saying earlier, you usually only think of the rich and famous for like, oh, well, they can handle the cost of it. You don't think of two people that make barely over minimum wage. That, you know.
And in fairness, at the time I was working, and I was getting paid a decent amount of money. We weren't rich by any means. And Sarah had been at the same job for 6 years at that point, 7 years, something like that, and had gotten their annual raises, and you know, for her job was making okay money. Neither of us were rich. We weren't raking in the dough, but we also weren't minimum wage workers. Wow. So, but it was still daunting because, like, our first appointment with Dr. Delaney was going to be like $700.
It was $400.
$400.
But I remember the call. Front. They said, yeah, you have to pay for that up front. Like, there's no, like, we have the meeting and then you pay. It's every time you meet, it is up front. You pay before you can go see the doctor. So
$400 before we even talked to a doctor about it. And that didn't cover anything like, of course, the drive to Omaha and back if we had to stay at a hotel, which fortunately we didn't.
Blood work, it didn't cover.
Didn't cover any lab work, blood work, any of that stuff. That was all going to be extra.
They do a lot of blood work.
Yeah. So we first knew that we were going to have to do $500 out of pocket, or $400 out of pocket there, plus, like I said, travel expenses.
It's basically a tank of gas. So, I mean...
and, you know, food, because we're not at homes. We can't eat that. And, you know, we had to arrange to make sure we were both off from work on the day to do it.
Yeah. And that was one area we were both lucky in, is because we'd been at our jobs for at least a decent amount of time, both jobs were very understanding of... Because sometimes it would be short notice. I mean, we were going there quite often, but, you know, I'd call and they'd say... Okay, your appointment's on Tuesday at 7 a.m. So, okay. I mean, that was the appointment. There was no really negotiating.
But so we had to figure out how to pay for this, how to cover all these costs. And we knew that even where we were in our jobs, we weren't going to be able to cover it all just based on our income. We knew that we were going to need some help. We were fortunate enough to own a house at the time, and at the time had owned the house for like 10 years or so. 9 years, 10 years almost.
Probably.
Anyways, doesn't matter the exact time because it would have been around 10 years. So we knew we had some equity in the house. So we go and we approach a lender at our bank and say, hey, we're looking to refinance or get a home equity loan, whatever we need to do to cover this cost. And we start that process. And anyone who's ever refinanced or taken out a second loan on their house knows it's not a quick process.
No.
And we had an appointment fastly. And so we knew there was going to be something else we would need to do. And we made the decision. We'd made this before we actually set up the appointment with the lender, because we knew that wasn't going to be fast enough, that we put up a GoFundMe.
Yeah. I remember either I emailed you from work because I know I got the call, because at my job you couldn't actually have your phone with you, but since I knew that this boss, or this call was coming in. I told my boss, I had my phone, and I remember her telling me that IUI was not going to be a suitable thing for us. So we'd have to do IVF. And I remember, I think I emailed you and I said, go set up a GoFundMe.
Yep.
Because,
So we had to set up this GoFundMe. Well, the IVF call would have been a little bit later, but we still had to set up this GoFundMe to do this. And that was the moment, and I mentioned this before, that was the moment the weight came off our shoulders, because it was no longer something that we were fighting on our own. It was now out there in the public eye. And the moment you press publish on something like a GoFundMe for infertility treatment, you feel like everyone you know is looking at you. But at the same point, we'd been fighting this for 6 years, 5 years at this time. And so suddenly having this hiding weight off of our shoulder, it was out there in the public, people knew about it, it wasn't something we were hiding anymore, was a really big deal. And it was this like really lightening load for us. The GoFundMe, we mentioned before, we didn't make a ton of money off of it, under $1,000.
It was around 900 something.
And so it definitely helped.
Oh, yeah.
We're not even gonna try to lie and say it didn't help. But
covered 2 appointments.
Yeah, but it wasn't paying for it. We still needed that home equity loan. We still needed the extra help, but it was more valuable than the money, because it got it out there in the open. And that's why we have this podcast, is because I truly feel that getting it out in the open is the best thing for anyone struggling with infertility. It's such a personal thing that you feel like you've got to fight this on your own, and you don't. Get out there, get it so other people know about it. It instantly stops all of the, so when are you going to have a baby talk? Or, all that weird pressure. I'd had pressure on me to have a baby from family members since not long after Sarah and I got married. My mom, bless her soul, wanted another grandchild. By the time Sarah and I got married, my niece and my nephew were all like 5 and 8, something like that. 4 and 7, because
we started dating. She was 2.
My niece was born in 2001, so yeah, so like 4 and 7. So my mom was ready to be a grandma again, but we weren't ready when we first got married, or so we thought at least, and we put time off, but so we had all this pressure and had all this. Even just random strangers, asking, so you got kids yet? What are you waiting for? The GoFundMe was when that weight got off our shoulders. But I knew the GoFundMe wasn't going to make enough money. I've got some kind of statistics here right now. The base cost, the national average for base clinic costs of IVF is $12,000, but that doesn't include drugs.
Okay, I was going to say
that doesn't include lab work. That doesn't include any of that stuff. That's just the base clinic costs, right? That's the national average. So some places it's less, some places it's more. One cycle average is about $20,000.
Okay.
Again, still not counting the drugs still. Because the drugs on ours ended up being about $9,000.
I was gonna say 7 something, but yeah, 8. 7 or 8.
Yeah. And so we knew that as much as family and friends loved us, as much as they were going to try to support us, we knew we weren't going to get $29,000 through a GoFundMe. We knew we had to find some other way to do it. And that's where the home equity loan, I think technically it was a second mortgage. I'm no financial guy. I don't know we just kind of had to trust our mortgage specialist, our lender, to lead us to the right way to get the money. And
she was very, very helpful, and you know.
But again, that was another stress going on at the same time as all of this, because while doing all of the testing and all of that, we were still filling out paperwork, and it literally came down to like the week before we were supposed to start treatment. We still hadn't heard an official approval from the bank. And then we heard an approval, but it was going to be like 2 weeks before we got our money or something like that. So then she arranged for a small loan to cover the start of our treatment so that we could do that and then pay it back as soon as our full loan came in. It was weird.
Well, I don't think people knew how stressed we were. I mean, they knew about the IVF, but they didn't realize how close to the deadline we were. Because literally, if we wouldn't have got the loan, we didn't have the money. We don't have family that was like saying, "Oh, here, we'll get it." I mean, none of our, you know.
So here we were, and I think that's one of the things that I take from this whole experience is that after years of everything moving slowly, very suddenly things moved very fast. Because we went from doctors not knowing what to do to an appointment where we walked in and Dr. Delaney looked over Sarah's chart, probably, like we said, had looked over it before, talked to Sarah a bit, and within 5 minutes said, "I'm pretty sure I know what's wrong. Let's go into another room. We'll do a test and find out." And it was effectively a version of the same test that she had done previously, but instead of done
water, right?
With dye and all of that stuff, it was done with water. And instead of being done with a CT or X-ray, it was being done with an ultrasound. But it was effectively the same test, except it was way easier for Sarah to do.
I literally think I had a panic attack because in the office she said it, and I was like, "You mean the same thing that I just went through where I was crying and it took like 45 minutes?" And I almost started crying then just because I was like, I don't know if I can go through that. But yeah, it was, I don't know if it was just experience or the water. I know some people said that makes a difference, but just the whole thing. I mean, I was like, "Oh, that's it?" Like, "Oh, okay."
Well, it was a way more pleasant experience just from the standpoint we weren't in a room with random X-ray techs come walking in and out of a door and no giant machinery. It was just kind of a basic exam
let's be
room.
honest, it's still uncomfortable to some degree. I'm not trying to like sugarcoat. I just meant compared to the other one. I mean, I literally was physically crying because, and I feel like I have a high tolerance of pain. So it's like, I mean, it takes a lot for me to be like, "Oh, okay." You know, Casey's hand probably, you know, knew the amount of pain I was in during that procedure. And this one, it was like, it just, comparatively, it was much more smooth sailing.
Well, I think a lot of things play into it. We mentioned before that the doctor and Carney hadn't done it before. Again, it was being done with an X-ray or CT. I can't remember exactly what it was.
I think it was an X-ray machine.
X-ray machine. Which then required a bunch of lab technicians. This one was being done with an ultrasound, which that meant it was just the doctor and I think one nurse in the room.
That was usually the extent of it.
And that was it. And the test very quickly confirmed to the doctor the diagnosis of PCOS. So we've mentioned PCOS before. But in case we didn't go into it deep enough, I can't remember. PCOS stands for polycystic ovary syndrome. And effectively, it's Sarah's ovaries. A lot of people have PCOS. So the ovaries have these small cysts, usually caused by a hormone imbalance, that grow on them that can prevent or at least modify ovulation. And in Sarah's case, that it had been untreated for so long that the doctor was pretty sure that Sarah was never actually releasing any eggs. That would explain why her her cycle was so erratic. Like, it could be regular for 4 months and then suddenly be way off, and then suddenly be regular again, then suddenly be way off. It's because she was probably never dropping an egg. And at that point, then they decided to test me. And I mentioned before the uncomfort and how awkward the tests were for me in Kearney, dealing with a Catholic health hospital that had the only lab in town. Testing for the man at a fertility clinic like Methodist is a different ballpark altogether. They have rooms set up that you get walked into, and they've got magazines and DVDs, and they collect the sample all there, and they process it all there, and we can talk more about that. I've got a whole comedy routine based off of it, but now's not the time. But
I just wonder, this kind of going back, I kind of wonder why they don't do ultrasounds during just your normal gynecological visit, because that's one thing. That's what besides the symptoms that I've been telling my doctor for years, just one quick look of the ultrasound basically showed all the cysts. And so my brain is just like, I wonder why they don't. The thing is, cost, it would have been so much helpful. That's another whole scenario. We have I have very massive anger for the years we spent, and just knowing that that's one step. If there's like 12 steps, one of them was anger, because, this could have been dealt with a long time ago.
No,
But I just wonder why they don't, because this does seem to be affecting more and more women than, maybe we just didn't know about it, but
I think we got caught in a perfect storm of small town Nebraska and insurance shenanigans. Ultrasounds cost money. Insurance doesn't want to pay for them if they don't deem them medically necessary. So unless the doctor sees a reason to suspect something like PCOS, they're not going to approve an ultrasound. So doctors aren't going to request them unless they have a big reason to think it. So I think that's the insurance side of it. I think the other side of it is small town Nebraska. I don't think the doctors in Nebraska would know PCOS from a hole in their head, because you clearly exhibited basically every symptom of it and talked to them about it multiple times. And they never even brought it up. They never said
I remember looking up just my symptoms, because some of the symptoms, irregular cycle, weight gain, and facial hair. I remember I just typing in all those things, and it came up, and I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds about right. And it's just, I don't know. All I gotta say is, if you're out there and you've been trying, and you're from a small town, I hate to say it, try to make a plan to go to a bigger city. Mm-hmm. Do research, try to find out where in your state, and unfortunately you still have to look for your insurance provider, and see if you need to be recommended. But unfortunately that's our experience in Kearney, was that they didn't, except for that last lady that was like, I can't help you, I'm sending you to a, no offense, professional type person. But I thank her all the time, because if she would never had enough guts to say, gosh, I don't want to waste your money and your time, I don't know.
So that's I've had the same anger at the Kearney doctors as you do. And there's a lot of reasons to be angry at them. We had 6 years or 5 years of testing there, that they could have figured something out and could have come up with PCOS, and that would have at least put us on a path. Because if Sarah would have started the medicine, even just the medicine to treat PCOS, 5 years earlier, we might not have found ourselves in the same situations that we did.
Technically, some of the research has been said that actually being on birth control actually helps people with PCOS get pregnant. And so it's like, That'd have been nice to have known, because it keeps your cycle. It actually keeps your cycle consistent. Mm-hmm. Just a little tidbit I actually learned afterwards was that actually, because that's half the battle, is your cycle's all over the place, so you can't plan anything.
But then there's also medicine that helps with the PCOS itself. Well, if we would have been on that 5 years earlier.
Well, 5 years, you've been 5 years younger. Your sperm would have been 5 years younger. Mm-hmm. They might have been able to do IUI.
Yeah. So we go... Getting back. The cost, we're wasting through what savings we had while trying to get the approvals for the loans. We had the GoFundMe, which we were fortunate enough to get some out of that we could use. But it was literally one of those. We got the call from the doctors. They did my tests. They determined that my count was low, which surprised me because every time the tests were done in Kearney, they said they were still within normal ranges. And we do the test at Methodist, and they're like, no, they're low. They're low. And more specifically, and apparently the Kearney lab doesn't even really look at it, my motility was low, which means not only did I have less swimmers, but they were moving less.
They were distracted. Like, squirrel.
They were little ADD swimmers, I guess. No.
Who knows?
But
you have to make jokes at some point of some things.
But so I guess the in the end, what we're trying to say with a lot of the talk about PCOS is it's important to be your own advocate. Yes. If you don't feel like your doctors are making progress on you, ask to talk to different doctors. If you are currently seeing just an OBGYN about it, even if they're the quote-unquote fertility person in your town, if they're not a radiological endocrinologist, maybe ask to see an RE or a specialist. Especially
if you've been trying for over a year. Because I will say they might be somewhat defiant of referring you if you've only been doing this for 3 months. So I probably would still, I hate to say wait at least a year, but that's...
I would venture to say people aren't listening to this podcast if they haven't been trying for a while. So
I'm just saying,
But it's important to be your own advocate and say, hey, listen, we've been trying a lot of this stuff and it doesn't seem to be working. I think it's time to see a specialist. But so here we were. We finally had the call that said, hey, Casey's semen analysis shows low motility and low count, and partnered with the PCOS. I don't think IUI is going to be a viable option. IUI depends on a few things. If it had just been the PCOS, but my sperm count had been fine, then they might have done IUI. IUI, of course, is jokingly sometimes referred to as the turkey baster method. It's the woman takes medicine, takes drugs to increase their ovulation and trigger them to drop eggs, often drop multiples. And then the man's sample is manually injected high up in there so that it has to travel less distance and has a greater chance of ovulating or of impregnating. However, when your sperm count is of a certain level or below, that becomes really, really hard to get enough sperm in there to make the chances good. And that's when our Dr. Delaney said, for you guys, it would probably just be wasting your money to do IUI. You could do 3 or 4 rounds of it and not see any success. So let's just hotshot you straight to IVF. But then we get given this thing that shows the cost of IVF and estimated cost of medicines. Yeah. And we really should look to see. I'm sure we still have that paper somewhere. We've moved twice since then, so things are in boxes still somewhere. But but seeing that sticker shock of $25,000 or $27,000,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very detailed. I mean, like one procedure was this and then another and then this and all the appointments and.
Yeah, it was very detailed. It was even split up amongst, appointments. This appointment would do this, and this is how much it would be. This appointment would do this, and this is how much it would be. This appointment would be, and so on and so forth. But then at the end, I had the total. And so at that point, we knew how much we were going to need. And at that point, we had to start putting some extra pressure on the loan officer to get us approved and paid out on it.
So I just with this all being said, if you're even thinking about it, I would go in, if this is what way you're thinking financially, because I mean, we probably aged a good year in that last week of trying to figure out, because I was about ready to start medicine and all of this, and the procedure would be set up. And so I'm just saying now that if you're thinking this, that's your only way financially, go talk to someone now about it. Go to your bank that you like, that you trust. That's all I just want to say, because this is kind of about the money part, the financial area. And, I actually was just talking to Casey before this. I'm like, man, we should have tried a fundraiser or something. And so, or if there's something like that, but I just mean for us, the bank, it's, it takes a while. So if you're thinking, I would start now.
Yes, definitely start figuring out the finances. If it's taking out a loan against a house like we did, start working on getting all the stuff ready for that and talking to a banker about that. If it's through some other means, if it's through an insurance, like if you happen to have insurance that's going to cover it, start figuring out that. Do some research. We talked a little bit on one of the shows about how even when insurance does cover it, it often has a lifetime maximum.
Or cap.
And you have to make sure that you're using it effectively. I've been reading a bit, since we didn't have to go through insurance, we didn't have to deal this, but I've been reading a bit about it. And some people are saying that using the insurance for the procedures, but using personal funds for the drugs can be the better use of it, because sometimes you can get discounts on the drugs if you're paying in cash versus if you're sending it through insurance. And the drugs can really quickly eat into this lifetime maximum that you want to cover as much as you can of the procedures. So, like I say, I haven't been through that myself. That's just something that I've been reading. And so, to our listeners out there, feel free to email us, infertilitybitespodcast@gmail.com. Give us your advice on how you went about financing it or paying for it, in what ways, what tricks and tips that you have for making the most out of insurance or saving the most money. If there's like I said, we're not experts or anything, but if there's a pharmacy that you found works with you better for cost of medicine, I know there are some internet pharmacies that some doctors don't like you to use because they're importing the drugs from Canada or someplace like that, and it's sketchy in their mind. Canada has universal health care, so but hit us up on infertilitybitespodcast@gmail.com with your hints on that. We'll talk about it a little bit more on the next show, I bet. But I think that'll take us to the end of our tale for this week on us. Our advice again, make sure to start thinking about the financing now. If you haven't figured out how you're going to pay for it, start figuring that out, because once they start coming up with a plan, things can progress fairly fast.
Especially because they are assuming you've been trying for years, and as evident, we're not getting any younger, so they're like, you're here for a reason. So
they'll start doing the pills, and some people, because they'll usually put you on birth control for a month and then do some testing to see how your follicles are developing,
and then they'll have the meeting about all the shots.
Yes, and we'll get into that. But once they decide that you're follicles have developed or they are on track, they can say, let's pull the trigger and let's do this now. And boom, you're rolling down the hill. So get your stuff figured out as much in advance. But now we're going to move on to story time. This is my favorite part of these because we get to talk a little bit about other people that have been going through these same sorts of battles, and tell their stories. And the show really doesn't exist without other people's stories as well. I mean, it's just us telling our story, but we want to tell other stories. So the story this week comes from Lucy Lee in North Carolina. Right.
Hi, Lucy.
Yes. She, as from their first miscarriage, they were trying 8 years before they finally got their first rainbow baby in 2018. They suffered another miscarriage in 2019 and have been trying for over a year since then to get another baby. So, they've done 4 different IUIs, 1 HSG. They were diagnosed with endometriosis, had to have surgery to remove it, went to an RE for IVF, diagnosed with low ovarian reserve, and also told that they wouldn't be able to conceive naturally without the help of IVF. Wow. Tried every Western to Eastern remedy that they could to help conceive. They say infertility makes you feel so alone and overwhelmed no matter what, and to make it worse when you experience a miscarriage. Her mother has been the most supportive of her during this. So they're trying again for baby number 3 total after their second miscarriage in last July. And their advice for everyone is to ask all the questions that are in your head, no matter how big or small. Seek help from people who understand your situation. So definitely sending good baby thoughts, good baby juju to Lucy Lee out there in North Carolina. Hoping this was submitted a couple weeks ago, so here's hoping that she's had some progress. And that there's some good news coming to her in the future.
Send in prayers, because
yes,
it's a lot, and a lot of times people think, you have one kid, that's it. Well, usually people that want kids, most of the time wanted more than one. Yeah. So
I know very few people who were like, I dreamed so long of having one kid and then stopping. Most of them say, like we did, we were both the youngest of 3. We thought 3 kids would be pretty much perfect. There are a lot of people who say, I dream of having a big family, like 8 or 9 kids. That's a little much for me, but
I don't know about that.
To each their own, right? But not too many people say, I just want to have one and then I'm done.
So it's just for people to be understanding that just because you have one doesn't mean you can't fight infertility for a second one. I'm just...
Yeah, and that's the deal, the simple fact is...
People are like, oh, you're greedy. And I'm like, well no. I always feel like I got to defend people because some people will be like, no, that's wrong. You already have one. I'm like, yeah, but just like with anything, you were wanting more. And so, sorry, I'm rambling. And
ultimately, that's what it comes down to. Sarah and I, we've got our beautiful 2.5-year-old daughter, Stella Faye. She is wonderful. And if she is destined to be our only baby, so be it. Wonderful. But we definitely want more. We have had some financial setbacks in the last couple years that have made it so we no longer have some of the advantages that we had going through the first round of IVF. We, of course, do have, I think we've got 6 frozen eggs right now. I think it's 6, 5 or 6.
It could be, I can't.
And so
we have 6 because I think 2 of them are great and then 4 were just good.
Mm-hmm. But so we'd love to do that. So somewhere down the road, we'd love to start getting something put together for having a second baby.
It's always a slight joke in our house because every time I'm like, oh, I want another baby, I'm like, when are you gonna go rob a bank? Because because it's like you can see them. They're your eggs, and you're paying. I mean, technically, we pay for them every year. At some point, we get a bill. But I just mean, it's like you're so close, but you're so far away.
So if you hear about a bank being robbed in Omaha, Nebraska, it wasn't me. I was nowhere near it.
I'll verify it.
So, but we'd love to have a second baby. So all hopes for Lucy Lee.
Yes.
Here's hoping that good news comes to them in the near future.
Send in love.
But I think we'll start to wrap it up for this. I mentioned last time we have a Facebook page. You can go to facebook.com/infertilitybites for that. We do have a Twitter at InfertilityPod. So you can tweet us there. We mentioned the Gmail before, infertilitybitespodcast@gmail.com. Those are all great ways you can get in touch with us there. This show only really works when listeners like you submit their stories.
Yes.
I said this before. I've said it online quite a few times. Every journey is a fingerprint, and we're here to celebrate all of them. The successes and the setbacks. We don't just want to tell stories of people who've had their miracle baby. We also want to tell the stories of people who are still trying, people who are relatively early. Everyone's story probably started years before where they are now. If you're to the point now that you're listening to an infertility podcast, you probably have been battling it for years. And those are the stories that we want to tell, because those are the times that you feel the most alone. And you need to understand that you're not alone, that a lot of people deal with this, and they deal with it silently.
When you're talking about that, I was thinking of when we were in the office at Dr. Delaney's, and I would look over, and this huge wall would be just filled with file folders. And granted, maybe not all of those are for people wanting babies, but there was just so many. I mean, it was just like, oh my gosh, you're not alone.
No, you are definitely not alone. So, so you can submit your story. We've got a flow page, flow.page/infertilitybites. You can go there. You can see all of our links for where to listen to this podcast, our Facebook, our Twitter, as well as a link for the form to submit your story. We've got a few more stories that we can cover, but we always want more. And
yes,
ideally, we'll get to the end of our story and we'd be able to fill this podcast every week with other people's stories. Down the road, I'd love to start interviewing some people. But that only works if people continue to send in their stories. So hit us up, Facebook, Twitter, go to that form and fill it out. We want to tell your story, and we would very much appreciate it. If you want to be anonymous in it, just let us know. We won't say your name. We won't say any information like that. But if you want to get it out there, I highly recommend you do, because it'll help you feel less alone. We also, I know some Facebook pages frown on this, but I have no problem on this show sending out a plug for a fundraising or an Etsy store, or some way that you're trying to GoFundMe. So that's what we went through. Anything we can do to help you guys, that's what we're here to do. If you are enjoying our show and don't feel ready to submit a story, or even if you do, a review for our show on whatever platform you listen to it would be great. It really helps other people find our show if they can see some reviews. So if you're comfortable doing that, put a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever, saying how much you enjoy the show. If you're even comfortable with sharing this on your social media, send out a tweet or a Facebook post saying, I'm really enjoying Infertility Bites, with a link to our show on whatever platform you want to use. Those are the great ways to get more people to listen to this and get it out there, because the more people who listen, the less alone you're going to feel. But for now, we're going to wrap things up for this week. May your dreams of tiny feet be answered soon.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for listening. As always, we're going to let our little scientific miracle send us off with love and kisses. Talk to you later.
Bye. I love you.
Hello.
Hello.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Sure.